Good morning, everybody. It is Monday. It's the start of a new week, and I'm glad that you're with me. My name is Tim Harris. I'm the pastor at Woodburn Baptist Church, and it's time for 10 with Tim. Monday through Friday, each morning we gather at 10 o'clock, take 10 minutes, and look at some portion of the Word of God, going verse by verse right now through the Gospel of John. And today we're in John chapter 13, verses 1 to 17. I'm glad you're with me. I trust that you've read ahead or that you're going to read right after we're finished and that you're going to stay deep in the Word with me. We are in the final week of Jesus's life, and we are now in the upper room. This is where we find ourselves in John chapter 13. Now, as I've been telling you from the beginning, John knows that you've read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John knows what you know because of what you've read there. And John has this tendency not to tell you what the other guys told you. At the same time, John has a tendency to tell you what the other guys didn't tell you. And so we're in the upper room, and you think you know what happens in the upper room. You know the whole story about the bread and the cup and the Last Supper, and you think you know all about that, and you think you know what's going to happen. And John knows what you know, and he knows that story, but he's going to tell you something that nobody else told you. And so he sets it up rather beautifully, beginning in verse 1. It's the Passover. Jesus knows, and this is this long rehearsal of everything that Jesus knows. Jesus knows that his hour has come. Jesus knows that the devil has prompted Judas to betray him. Understand, John is always going to connect the cross with this final showdown between God and the evil one, God and Satan, right? So Jesus knows what the devil's up to, but Jesus also knows that the Father has given everything into his hands. He has all authority, and Jesus knows who he is, and he knows where he comes from and where he's going, right? The whence and the whither. I mean, John just connects everything in this amazing build-up to the story of the upper room. And then Jesus knowing all of these things, and again, John knowing what you know, and he knows what you know. And right at the moment where you think Jesus is going to take bread and bless it and break it, Jesus is going to take the cup. No, not in the Gospel of John. Jesus reaches out and he takes a towel and a basin of water and he begins to wash their feet. Now, you didn't know about that, right? Because again, John is going to tell you what nobody else told you. And we didn't know about this in the upper room. But this is an important part of what happens in the upper room. Now, you've probably, if you've been in church, you've probably heard preachers talk about the whole washing of feet, how it's the job of the lowest servant, and it is the job of the lowest servant. Nobody wants to wash feet. Yeah, I can't speak for y'all, but I don't even wash my own feet. I take a shower and I just trust that all the soap I'm putting in up here is somehow going to run down there. I don't wash my feet. You know, nobody wants to wash feet. And so in Jesus's day, the washing the feet was actually very important. Most people wore sandals or went barefoot. Understand that there weren't any, boots, there weren't any shoes that would cover the feet in that way. And it was dusty and dirty. People walked everywhere they went. And so when it came time to eat a meal, again, recognize in Jesus' day, nobody sits up at tables, in a chair and eats up here. They lay on the floor, they recline. They still do to this day in the Middle East. Meals are eaten in the floor on mats, and people literally, recline and eat with one hand and recline on the other. And that just means that their feet are in each other's face. Like literally, your feet are right there. Everybody's in the floor. And so my feet are in somebody else's face, which I guess kind of makes my feet their problem. And that brings us to the disciples, right? See, when they come in and they realize that there is no servant to wash feet, which again, there would usually be a servant. The lowest servant would have this task, but there's no servant. And so they got three options. Number one, you could wash your own feet, but I just explained why most of us don't, and for that matter, my feet will be in somebody else's feet. My feet will be their problem. So you could wash your own feet, but they're not going to wash their own feet. Now, the second option would be you be the servant. You take it on yourself to wash other people's feet, but they're not going to do that. They're too good to do that. I mean, they don't even wash their own feet. So they're not going to wash others. That is beneath them. They're too good for that. So they take option number 3, which is to sit down recline at the table, just sit down for dinner and think to yourself, man, somebody ought to be washing feet. Somebody ought to do it. Maybe the youngest, maybe the newest. I don't know, but that's what we do, right? Like somebody ought to, we don't say it out loud. But you know how that, in churches, we're good at that. Somebody ought to do something about that. Somebody ought to, somebody ought to wash our feet. But they don't say it, but they're thinking it. Somebody ought to. They never expected that somebody would. And that somebody would be Jesus. So Jesus, knowing that he's come from the Father, that he's returning to the Father, knowing that the Father's put all things into his hands, Jesus reaches for a towel and a basin of water, and he begins to wash their feet. Now, make no mistake, Jesus is the servant. He's making himself the servant, and he's simply doing what needs to be done. He sees the need and he meets the need. That's what servants do. But it's also a parabolic action. Parabolic, it's a parable, right? So when Jesus does this, he's setting an example. He says that, but also he's acting out something. He's acting out something that is more significant than just getting your feet washed. That's why when he gets to Simon Peter, Simon says, no, you're not washing my feet. I mean, no, you're not washing anybody but you're not washing my feet. I can't let this happen. I won't sit here and let you do that. And Jesus says, Simon, if you don't let me wash your feet, you can't have any part of me. That's the moment when you realize this is something bigger. This is something greater. Jesus is trying to get something across that's more important than the dirtiness of your feet. Understand, for Jesus here, it's not dirty feet that are the problem. It's sin-stained souls. This is what Jesus is trying to illustrate. This is what Jesus has actually come to do. Not so much to wash the feet of the world, but to, in one way or the other, take away the sin of the world, to somehow cleanse the sin-stained souls of all of us. So Jesus says, Peter, if you don't, I can't. You won't be. And Peter says, well, then okay. Then wash me all over. Head to toe, just wash me all over. But Peter protests. Peter has some feelings here. But the story I want to hear is about Judas, because again, we know that Jesus already knows that Judas will betray him, but of all the feet he washes in this moment, he washes Judas's feet. Judas doesn't say a word, but I wonder what's happening in his heart. I wonder what goes on. I wonder what thoughts are in that man's head when Jesus stoops down to wash his feet. It's just one of those stories that's never been told, but it's a story I'd love to hear. He washes Judas's feet. And in the end, Jesus gets back up, puts his robe back on, sits down, and starts teaching. He says, y'all, do you understand what I've done for you? No, I'll answer that question for them. They don't. They don't. They can't. But Jesus goes on and says, since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash each other's feet. Again, it's not about washing feet, but it's more than that. It's this whole example of servanthood. Jesus is saying, if I'm your Lord and teacher, and I'm not too good to stoop down, humble myself and serve, then you're not too good either. I mean, that's the point there. If I, your Lord and master, if I do this, then you're not too good to do this. Man. How many times do you see a need and you just sit back and think, man, somebody ought to do that. Somebody ought to, you need to get it through your head. You are somebody, it's you. If you see the need, then understand, chances are it's time for you to reach for the towel in the basin and go to work. That's what servants do. And Jesus says, if I, your Lord and your teacher, if I'm not too good, you're not too good. And it's just the mindset of a servant. The servant just sees the need, whatever the need is, and then the servant meets the need. Servant doesn't think of themselves as too good. The servant just realizes that's why I'm here. Understand? Now, in Jesus' case, what he's going to do for us, the need that he will meet for us is much, much deeper, much, much greater than any practical physical need. But it doesn't negate his example set for us that we should be meeting physical, practical needs. Whatever the need, when you see the need, you meet the need. That's what servants do. And Jesus says, I have set for you an example. Now you go and wash each other's feet. Understand? It's an example of servanthood. Jesus says, I'm not too good, so you're not too good. Go serve others. Isn't that an amazing lesson? Again, John's not going to tell you about the bread and the cup. You're not going to get that part. He knows you know that part, but he is going to go on and on and on, chapter after chapter after chapter of what Jesus says, how Jesus prays, and what happens in that upper room. He's not going to tell you the part you know, but he's going to tell you a whole lot you never knew about the disciples in the upper room. So this is where we are. Tomorrow, join with me. We'll be in chapter 13, verses 18 to 30. Tuesday, tomorrow. John chapter 13, verses 18 to 30. So read ahead. Join me in the morning, 10 o'clock for 10 with Tim. I love you guys. Have a great day.